There's a moment, quiet, almost invisible, when a woman's emotional posture toward a man changes. It isn't dramatic, no arguments, no sudden confessions, but something inside her shifts and she starts paying closer attention, not because she's anxious, but because she senses she could actually lose you. By the end of this video, I'll explain what creates that shift and why most men never realize when it happens. Before we begin, if you find yourself drawn to conversations that help you understand relationships more deeply and become a steadier, more grounded version of yourself, you're welcome to like the video and subscribe, not out of obligation, just so these conversations can keep finding you when you need them. Now let me speak to you directly. Many men believe that women fear losing a man when he becomes more impressive, more dominant, or more desired by others. That belief is understandable, but incomplete, because what actually creates that emotional shift has far less to do with status and far more to do with emotional gravity. As a psychologist, I've listened to countless women describe the exact moment they realized a man mattered to them more than they expected. And almost every time, it wasn't because he chased harder, it was because he changed internally. Here's the truth most men were never taught. Women don't fear losing a man who is trying to be irreplaceable. They become unsettled by losing access to a man who is emotionally self-contained. Early on, many men lead with effort, attention, availability, emotional over-explaining. It's sincere and often well-intentioned, but over time, that behavior communicates something subtle. My emotional center lives outside of me, and that doesn't create fear of loss. It creates emotional predictability. The shift happens when a man stops outsourcing his sense of stability, not when he becomes cold, not when he withdraws affection, and certainly not when he plays games, but when he develops a calm internal groundedness that doesn't rise or fall based on how he's being received. Women are exquisitely sensitive to this change. They may not consciously name it, but they feel it. Conversations feel different. Silence feels different. His presence feels solid rather than searching. And here's where the unease begins. Because when a man no longer needs to be chosen in order to feel whole, he becomes someone who can walk away without drama, and that possibility registers emotionally. This isn't fear rooted in insecurity, it's fear rooted in respect. Later in this video, I'll explain the single internal realization that triggers this shift most powerfully, and why trying to force it always backfires. For now, understand this. The emotional shift that makes a woman fear losing you begins the moment you stop needing her to confirm your worth and start quietly living from it instead. When that internal shift begins inside you, something else happens that most men completely misinterpret. The dynamic doesn't become louder, it becomes quieter, and that silence is often what confuses you. Many men expect that if a woman fears losing them, she'll become more expressive, more reassuring, more emotionally obvious. Sometimes that happens, but more often, what appears first is attentiveness. She listens differently. She notices pauses. She becomes subtly curious about your inner world again. Why? Because unpredictability has entered the emotional equation, but not the chaotic kind, the grounded kind. Let me be very clear about this. Emotional unpredictability created by inconsistency, withdrawal, or mixed signals breeds anxiety and mistrust. That is not what we're talking about here. The shift that creates emotional gravity is born from consistency paired with independence. When a man is emotionally centered, his reactions are steady. He doesn't overcorrect. He doesn't rush to explain himself. He doesn't scramble to restore harmony when there's mild tension. He allows space without abandoning connection. This is deeply regulating to a woman's nervous system. And paradoxically, it's also what makes her more aware of what she stands to lose. Because now, the relationship isn't being held together by effort. It's being held together by choice. That difference is profound. When a woman senses that you are with her because you want to be, not because you need to be, her emotional investment sharpens. She becomes more present, not because she's afraid in a panicked way, but because something meaningful is at stake. Here's something women often say in therapy, though rarely out loud to the men they're with. I feel like he'd be okay without me, and that makes me want to show up better. Not perform better, not compete, but show up more honestly. That's the emotional shift. It's not about dominance. It's not about withholding affection. It's not about creating distance. It's about becoming a man whose emotional life doesn't collapse if the relationship ends and therefore becomes richer while it exists. Men who haven't made this shift often unknowingly pressure the relationship to validate them. Men who have made it invite the relationship to meet them. That invitation feels different. It feels calmer. It feels more adult, and it feels harder to replace. Later, I'll explain why this shift often causes women to reopen emotional doors they thought were closed, and why it sometimes happens right when a man stops trying to do everything right. But for now, sit with this idea. When you stop clinging to connection and start standing firmly within yourself, connection doesn't disappear, it deepens. And that depth is what makes loss emotionally real. Not dramatic, not desperate. Real. One of the most misunderstood parts of this emotional shift is that it doesn't come from doing more. It comes from subtracting what was never truly you to begin with. Many men grow up learning that love is earned through usefulness. Be agreeable, be accommodating, be emotionally available at all times. On the surface, these traits look healthy, but when they're driven by fear of loss rather than self-respect, they quietly erode attraction. What changes everything is when a man stops negotiating his identity in exchange for connection. This is not about becoming rigid or inflexible. It's about becoming internally aligned. Women sense this alignment long before men realize they're broadcasting it. When you speak more slowly because you're not trying to be understood. When you disagree without defensiveness. When you no longer rush to repair mild disapproval. When your boundaries feel natural instead of rehearsed. These moments register emotionally. A woman may not say anything. She may not even fully understand why her perception of you has changed, but her body responds. Her attention sharpens. Her emotional posture shifts from assessment to consideration, because now losing you would mean losing access to something rare, emotional coherence. Most men believe women fear losing men who are exciting. In reality, women fear losing men who feel steady without being stagnant. There is safety in that, and there is depth. This is why trying to manufacture distance, mystery, or dominance never works long-term. Those strategies create tension, not gravity. They keep a woman alert, but not anchored. The emotional shift we're talking about anchors her. It tells her, this man is not bending himself to be chosen. He's allowing himself to be known. And that creates a different kind of risk. Because if she loses you, she's not just losing attention, she's losing an emotional environment where she could be fully herself without managing your reactions. That's what makes the possibility of loss feel heavier. There's something else that happens here, and it's subtle but powerful. When you stop performing emotional labor to keep the connection alive, a woman often begins contributing more of her own, not because she's afraid, but because the space now invites reciprocity. Healthy fear of loss is not about anxiety, it's about value recognition. Later in this video, I'll explain why this recognition often arrives when a man appears less concerned with the outcome, and how that paradox works psychologically. But for now, understand this. The emotional shift isn't triggered by strategy, it's triggered by integrity. When who you are stops changing based on whether you're being accepted, you become someone whose absence would be felt, not because you were loud, but because you were solid. There is a quiet moment that often follows this shift, and it's one that many men misread or even sabotage without realizing it. A woman may begin testing, not in a manipulative way, but in a nervous system way. She might express mild disagreement. She might delay a response. She might reveal a slightly more vulnerable or slightly more critical thought. This isn't a game, it's her body asking a question. Is this stability real? When a man is still emotionally dependent, these moments trigger over-explaining, reassurance-seeking, or subtle withdrawal. But when a man has made the internal shift we've been discussing, his response is different. He stays present. He doesn't chase. He doesn't punish. He doesn't collapse. And that response answers the question more clearly than any words could. This is where fear of loss begins to deepen, not as anxiety, but as attachment rooted in respect. Because now she sees that your emotional center is not easily disrupted. That disagreement doesn't threaten you. That closeness doesn't consume you. That distance doesn't destabilize you. This steadiness communicates something very powerful. I can be close without losing myself. For many women, that realization is emotionally disarming. It creates a sense of safety that allows desire to relax and deepen. And within that safety, the idea of losing you becomes more emotionally significant, not because you're scarce, but because you're reliable in your selfhood. Men often ask me, how do I make her see my value? The answer is almost always the same. Stop trying to display it. Value that has to be demonstrated repeatedly doesn't feel stable. Value that is lived quietly does. When you stop managing her perception of you, she starts managing her relationship to you. That's the shift. And here's the part most men don't expect. When a woman senses she could lose a man like this, she often becomes more emotionally honest. Not always kinder, but more real. She may ask deeper questions. She may express more clearly what she wants. She may reflect on the future with more seriousness. This isn't pressure, it's orientation. She's orienting herself around something that now feels meaningful enough to consider losing. Later, I'll explain why this stage can feel uncomfortable for men and why some men unconsciously undo the shift right here by returning to old patterns. But for now, let this land. Fear of loss doesn't arise when a woman feels controlled or impressed. It arises when she feels she is choosing a man who could continue being whole without her. That choice carries weight, and weight is what makes loss real. At this point, something important happens inside you as well, and it's rarely talked about. When a woman's emotional orientation shifts in this way, a man often feels a strange mixture of calm and uncertainty. Not insecurity, but awareness. You start to sense that the relationship is no longer being held together by effort alone, and that can feel unfamiliar if you've spent years believing love must be maintained through constant vigilance. This is where many men unconsciously revert. They sense her increased attention, her deeper engagement, her subtle concern about losing the connection, and instead of staying grounded, they tighten. They try to secure the bond. They start explaining more, planning more, reassuring more, and in doing so, they slowly undo the very shift that created the connection. Why? Because emotional gravity cannot be clutched. It only exists when you trust your own center enough not to chase confirmation. A woman doesn't fear losing a man because he wants her. She fears losing him because he chooses her and could choose differently without self-destruction. That distinction is everything. This is also why men who make this shift often hear phrases like, "You feel different lately," or "You seem more grounded," or even, "I don't know why, but I feel closer to you." Those statements aren't about your behavior. They're about your emotional posture. You are no longer leaning forward emotionally, trying to earn or secure. You're standing upright, inviting connection rather than seeking it. And here's something deeply important. This posture does not reduce intimacy. It increases it, because now intimacy is no longer being used to regulate anxiety. It's being used to share presence. Women feel this difference in their bodies. When a man is emotionally regulated, closeness feels nourishing instead of consuming. And when closeness feels nourishing, the thought of losing it becomes significant. This is where fear of loss matures into commitment, not obligation, not pressure, but conscious investment. Later, I'll explain the final internal realization that locks this shift into place, and why it often comes when a man stops trying to be enough and starts being at peace. But for now, remember this. If you feel tempted to grasp, explain, or secure, pause. Those impulses are understandable, but they come from the old belief that love disappears if you don't hold it tightly. The truth is quieter. Love deepens when you're willing to stand in it without bracing for collapse. And when a woman feels that steadiness, the possibility of losing you doesn't scare her. It sobers her. And sobriety is the foundation of lasting attachment. The final shift begins with a realization that happens so quietly, most men miss it when it arrives. There is no dramatic insight, no sudden confidence boost, just a calm internal sentence that changes how you show up everywhere. I will be okay, even if this ends. Not in a detached way, not in a resentful way, but in a grounded, adult way. When this realization settles into your nervous system, everything about your presence changes. Your tone softens. Your listening deepens. Your decisions become cleaner. You stop negotiating against imaginary losses that haven't happened yet. And this is where the emotional gravity becomes unmistakable. Because now, your desire for her is no longer fused with your fear of abandonment. It's simply desire. Women feel this immediately. They feel the absence of pressure, the lack of urgency, the sense that you are with them because it enriches your life, not because it stabilizes your identity. And paradoxically, this is what makes the idea of losing you feel real. Not because you threaten to leave, not because you withhold love, but because you are no longer bargaining with yourself to stay. This is what men often misunderstand. Fear of loss does not arise when a woman feels cornered. It arises when she feels chosen by someone who is free. Freedom is emotionally sobering. A man who is free does not rush intimacy. He does not force clarity. He does not demand reassurance. He allows the relationship to unfold at a pace that respects both people. And in that space, a woman begins to ask herself questions she didn't ask before. How do I show up with him? Am I meeting him with the same honesty? What would it mean to lose this? These questions are not fear-based, they are value-based, and value-based attachment is the kind that lasts. This is also why this shift often happens later than men expect. Not because women are slow to feel, but because it takes time for a man to genuinely release the belief that love is survival. Once that belief loosens, your energy changes. You stop auditioning. You stop managing impressions. You stop performing emotional competence. You simply become present, and presence is rare. Later, in the final part of this conversation, I'll tie everything together and explain why this shift, once made, cannot be faked, cannot be rushed, and cannot be undone without conscious choice. But for now, understand this. The emotional shift that makes a woman fear losing you is not something you create in her. It's something you create in yourself. And once it's real, she doesn't feel afraid. She feels awake. There is a reason this emotional shift stays with a woman long after a conversation ends, long after a moment of closeness passes, and even long after a relationship changes form. It's because what she's responding to isn't behavior, it's being. When a man reaches this place internally, he becomes emotionally legible. Not predictable, but readable. His yes means yes. His no is clean. His affection is offered, not negotiated. And his absence, if it were to happen, would not feel like drama. It would feel like loss. This is the part most men never hear. Women do not fear losing men who were loud in their love. They fear losing men who were clear in their presence. Clarity creates trust. Trust creates safety. And safety allows attachment to deepen without urgency. When you are emotionally clear, a woman doesn't have to monitor your moods or manage your reactions. She can relax into herself. And in that relaxed state, she becomes more aware of what she would be giving up if you were no longer there. That awareness doesn't arrive as panic. It arrives as appreciation. She notices the way conversations feel more honest with you, the way conflict doesn't escalate, the way silence doesn't feel threatening, the way she doesn't have to be smaller or louder to be seen. These are not dramatic qualities, but they are rare. And rarity is not about scarcity, it's about depth. This is why the emotional shift we've been discussing cannot be forced. The moment a man tries to produce fear of loss, he recenters his identity around being chosen, and the gravity disappears. What creates the shift is acceptance of uncertainty. You accept that love is a choice, renewed daily. You accept that connection is meaningful precisely because it is not guaranteed. You accept that your worth is not up for negotiation, even in intimacy. From that acceptance, something steady emerges, and that steadiness becomes something a woman doesn't want to lose, not because she needs it to survive, but because it makes her life more whole. If you take nothing else from this conversation, take this. The emotional shift that makes a woman fear losing you is the moment she realizes you are not holding on out of fear, but staying out of presence. That difference is felt, and it is remembered. If this conversation resonated with you, stay connected. not for strategies or answers, but for the kind of understanding that changes how you show up in the quiet moments that matter most.